It's hard for me to believe that as I'm recording this, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is about to turn a year old. Given that Into the Spider-Verse is quite literally my favorite movie of all time, one which I watched several times while it was in theaters, you can imagine the absolute hype I felt in the intervening years leading up to the release of its sequel. Through all the delays and pushbacks, I was ready to see the follow-up to this absolute masterpiece after 5 painfully long years, and I liked it. Yeah, I should make it clear going in that while this is going to be a video that highlights a specifically large issue I hold with the film, I still like it a lot, and I think it's a pretty good movie overall. It actually handles a lot of its characters really well and sends them on meaningful, well-rounded arcs that enrich the overall narrative. It is, for the most part, a worthy addition to the Spider-Verse series. But I'm sure you all noticed the lack of subtlety with which I made sure to specify mostly in all those cases. Because, as you can probably imagine given the title and thumbnail of this video, there is one character who I think was handled rather poorly. And it especially upsets me because in the first movie, Peter B. Parker was my favorite character. And not just that, he was and still is my favorite version of Peter Parker that we've ever seen put to screen. When I think of the character, his is the version that instantly pops into my head. Because the first Spider-Verse film develops Peter very richly and in ways that I never would have expected from a Spider-Man movie. It's not unheard of for this character to have well-written struggles, but never would I have expected to see such a masterfully crafted deconstruction of such an iconic hero. His journey throughout the first film is one of a broken, tired Spider-Man who's lost everything and everyone he ever cared about, and has resigned himself to live alone in a shabby apartment and watch seahorse documentaries. And what makes it worse is that a lot of the loss he's experienced is his fault and due to his own shortcomings as a person rather than as Spider-Man. He doesn't want to have kids because he's scared of how badly he would mess up being a father, and it's only through his reluctant mentorship of Miles that he realizes he'd actually make a pretty good dad. We get to watch a version of Peter who's been raked through the mud pick himself back up after being knocked down so many times because, well,
no matter how many times I get hit, I always get back up.
Peter B. Parker is my definitive version of the character, and were it not for the stuff they do with Miles and Across, he would absolutely be my favorite Spider-Man put to screen. Which is why when I saw that he would be returning for the second movie, and that he would have finally started a family, as was clearly implied by the end of the first movie, I couldn't have been more ecstatic. But unfortunately, when I watched the movie, a lot of the issues present with his character were glaringly noticeable. I caught most of them on my first viewing and was extremely disappointed by that aspect of the film. But after a few rewatches, there's even more that I never really caught, or that my brain registered subconsciously, but I really didn't nail down until my most recent viewing, and that's what prompted me to make this video finally. Now, of course, the most obvious thing that irks me about Peter is the way he handles his job as a parent, which again is especially frustrating given the fact that him having a baby represents the culmination of his arc in the last movie, and I was really excited to see what they would do with that here. When he finally shows up a little over halfway through the film, we're introduced to Mayday Parker, his and MJ's infant daughter. I'm not entirely clear on if the timelines of each respective universe are exactly parallel, since for Miles it's been about 16 months, but for Peter it seems to have been a little bit longer given her age. Either way, Mayday is definitely still a baby, but she does clearly appear to have inherited her dad's spider powers, which is something that'll be worth keeping in mind as we get into this. Peter even made her own web shooters so that she can swing around, which is questionable. The broader point I'm about to make here is that Peter is extremely irresponsible when it comes to how he parents Mayday, and I think this is just one of a few microcosms that serves as an example of a larger issue. It's not very safe to give a baby with superpowers access to the means to swing around wherever she wants, even if her powers also grant her at least some level of durability. And no, Peter addressing the fact that it wasn't a good idea doesn't really change the fact that it was bad.
I knew I was gonna regret making her that web shooter. I shouldn't have done it. That's an actual mistake.
That's what we call lamp shading, ladies and gentlemen. Now, it does seem worth getting into exactly the nature of Mayday's abilities since it is relevant. Like I said, she has spider powers, which I would imagine gives her a lot of the same advanced reflexes and reaction times as you typically see from a spider person, as well as a lot of the same agility and a good deal of durability. Though, seeing as she's a baby, I don't imagine any of that is nearly to the same extent as a fully grown or even teenage spider person. So while Peter, Miles, or Gwen can take pretty severe damage and walk away fine, I'm gonna assume the same can't be said for Mayday. We frankly don't have any way of determining exactly how much she can take. It might be as much as your average adult human, maybe more, maybe less. Though it's probably safe to assume that if she were to, for example, fall out of Peter's baby carrier while he's hanging from the ceiling and Peter isn't able to jump down in time to catch her, that would probably really hurt or injure her, if not outright kill her. So with that in mind, I wonder if we think it'd be a good idea for Peter to bring her along with him during this incredibly intense, fast-paced chase sequence where several superpowered beings are trampling over each other trying to capture Miles. Yeah, I don't think so either.
All right,
sorry for doing this. This is bad parenting.
Stop lampshading! The defenses I've heard for this are interesting, to say the least. But I suppose if we want to get into this, we should lay out all the context and determine what I think the best choice probably is if you're Peter. He wanted to bring Mayday along because he was hoping to get a moment alone with Miles, have him hold the baby to calm him down, and try to have a heart-to-heart with him to get him to see reason about the whole letting his dad die thing. You know, as you do. Okay, so I'm not a father, so maybe I just have no idea what I'm talking about, but I somehow don't think I'd feel safe with bringing my baby along during this dangerous spider chase and carrying her around through all these narrow spaces as I chase Miles through this factory just so that I can have a heart-to-heart with the guy. I'm sure Peter cares about Miles, but the priority of his child's safety has to come first, even above all that, surely. I mean, he just never struck me as the kind to be so brazen with the lives of the people he cares about is all, especially his own flesh and blood. And you really don't even need her here to say what you need to say to Miles. Again, he wanted her there because he hoped she'd be able to help de-escalate the situation, but given the things we've just listed, I think you're better off just giving him the speech without her. At any rate, once this plan fails and the chase proceeds again, it should be clear to Peter that this isn't gonna work and he should go ahead and take Mayday somewhere less dangerous. So even just accepting that he's brought her along this far, there are two courses of action that I would recommend next. Number one, take her home. Literally just use your fancy little wristwatch to head back to your own dimension, lay her down in her crib, and then come back to rejoin the chase. I've heard it argued that this is a bad idea because we're shown how long it takes to dimension hop, so by the time he gets back, the chase might have moved miles away, and he'll have no idea how or where to find them. Which is an interesting point to make, given that all the spider people chasing Miles are communicating through earpieces, and Peter is connected to that network, so I don't think he would have had that much trouble figuring out where they all were, if it wasn't already obvious just by scanning the city and seeing a sea of Spider-Men all gathered in one spot. But also, it really doesn't take that long from what we're shown. I don't imagine the chase will have even moved all that far by the time he gets back to Miguel's dimension. And option two, just swing her back to the Spider Society headquarters real quick, leave her under the supervision of Spider-Bite, and then go join the chase, which is what you should have done anyway, Peter. If you're afraid of her going off on her own while you're not there to protect her, fucking web her up or something. I recognize that that's kind of cruel, but it's a lot less cruel and dangerous than taking her with you on the back of a bullet train going God only knows how fast and heading straight toward outer space. I don't understand how anyone can defend this. Let's take another look at what we talked about with Spider-Man's superhuman durability. Across several continuities, we've seen examples of Spider-Man being able to withstand impressive amounts of punishment, and yet there are still very clear limits to what Peter can withstand before injuring himself. Results are likely to vary depending on the version we're talking about, and in the specific case of these films, there do appear to be some level of cartoon physics at play with what certain characters are able to do that they realistically shouldn't be capable of. So there is some wiggle room here, but it's important that we have those clear limits so that we understand generally what our main characters can withstand, and we're shown in the previous film that a much younger and more physically fit version of Peter is still capable of being badly injured and eventually killed if he takes strong enough hits. The film is also treating it as though they're high enough up that even for a spider person, it would be deadly to fall from this height. The only reason it's not for Miles or Miguel is because Miguel has a suit that allows him to guide his falls, and Miles is presumably latching onto flying cars like he did when he initially escaped the tower. So even though people like to defend this by saying she has superpowers, I think it's fair to assume that if Peter were to accidentally drop her, she would die. Oh, but Peter wouldn't drop her, and even if he did, he could easily catch her because he's Spider-Man. This is a situation where Peter is hardly in control of all the variables. If something happens, like, say, Miles blasting Miguel with a big burst of electricity, sending him flying back and crashing right into multiple Spider-Men down below, causing them to lose their grip on the train, there is absolutely no way Peter can guarantee Mayday's safety. Nor does being Spider-Man automatically mean you're going to be able to react and move quickly enough to save someone who's falling to their death, especially when you're this high up and the train is moving as quickly as it is. By the time Peter even jumps to rescue her, she might have already bashed her head in on one of these tunnel edges. Peter also has no idea just how strong Miles actually is, so there's no way of judging how powerful the blast is gonna be when he does it to Miguel. For all he knows, he and Gwen are well within the danger zone and would be sent flying, possibly even sustaining some injury that weakens Peter and makes it harder for him to react in time to save his daughter. Not to mention the injury Mayday might sustain if the blast hits her. Oh, but Miles would never do anything to hurt Peter or his family. No one is saying he would do it on purpose or with any kind of intent to hurt his friends, but accidents happen, and Miles is hardly in the best position right now to fully control the situation either. Plus, even if Peter was pretty confident in his ability to save Mayday in any such event, that's still not an excuse to bring her into any dangerous situation. Like, I'm not Spider-Man, but I'm pretty confident that if I held a baby over a fire, I'd be fully capable of ensuring that I don't accidentally drop them into it. But that doesn't suddenly make it a good idea for me to do that, even if I think holding the baby over the fire is the only way to help someone I care about. So no, there's just nothing defensible about this entire sequence, and it was easily the biggest thing I noticed upon my first couple of viewings that really cemented my take on the handling of his character. But there's more. When defending him bringing her along to the spider chase, people like to ignore the alternatives I've already presented by saying that Peter really had no other choice, and no time to leave Mayday anywhere else if he wanted to be involved. And again, apparently getting through to Miles was more important to him than protecting his own child, so he really wants to be involved in this. However, it's also worth noting a few extra things, the first of which is that when he eventually does bring Mayday home, we finally meet MJ, and she gives us this line.
Peter, did you bring our baby to another fight?
I'm sorry, another? Are we implying this has happened before? Let's pretend for even a second that the context surrounding him bringing her along to the spider chase was in any way justified. Am I to believe that every other time he's involved this poor baby in a fight, there just wasn't any other option but to endanger her life? Every instance of this happening has justified context. Really. Because as absurd as that is, even if that is the case, then I no longer want to hear any of you say Peter was justified in bringing her to the Spider Society headquarters to begin with. Clearly, this is not a safe environment for a child, as many have argued, just because there are hundreds of Spider-Men there to protect her in the event of an attack. Because apparently there have been multiple moments where push came to shove. Or then again, let's be really fair and assume it's only ever happened one other time. After all, MJ's line might just imply that it's happened once before, and obviously the fact that her baby's life was put in danger scared her, so she asked Peter to never let something like that happen again. That's not really how the scene seems to be framing it, as both he and MJ seem to almost laugh off what Peter just did as something quirky and cute, but let's go with that. My point still stands that if there's apparently a risk of Mayday's life being in danger should she accompany Peter to this place, then he should stop fucking bringing her there. However, it could also be argued that the fight being referred to happened here on Peter's Earth, unrelated to the Spider Society. Like, I don't know, maybe it was some random thing that Peter had to deal with while he was out with Mayday, so it really couldn't be helped. Again though, even that amount of context should really put into perspective for Peter just how dangerous this life can be now that he has a little one to look after. So maybe encouraging her at a very young age to swing around with webs and taking her along to meet all your cool new spider friends really isn't the best idea, because it might make her decide that she wants to follow in her dad's footsteps at an age where she is way too young to try to be a superhero. And even with all that said, I still don't believe Peter cares enough to justify endangering Mayday, because you can make excuses for him bringing her along to the spider chase, but how exactly do you square away the fact that he decides to, once again, bring her into dangerous and unknown territory at the end of the film? Gwen shows up to recruit him into her mission to find Miles and help him stop Miguel, and that is an undertaking where Peter has no way of knowing what's in store. She showed up to his universe while he and Mayday are safe at home, and still he decided it would be totally fine to bring her along. He could have just left her there, but he didn't, because unlike many of the people trying to defend this, the film itself somehow doesn't seem to recognize that what Peter is doing here is fucked up. They seem to think it's cute. Serious damage is being dealt to one of my favorite characters in all of fiction, but it's alright, because as long as we can put this cute baby in a pivotal role in Beyond the Spider-Verse, we can sell a shit ton of toys once that movie comes out. So that makes it all fine. One thing I really love about this whole discussion is how many people keep trying to justify this by using the fact that he let Miles and Gwen help out in the first movie, despite the fact that they're both kids. But, you know, setting aside the fact that obviously there's a big difference in maturity and capability between teenagers and babies, you might also consider the fact that they aren't Peter's children, and he has absolutely no authority to tell them they can't be Spider-Man. And even then, when Peter thinks Miles isn't ready to face Kingpin, he actively stops him from coming along, even at great personal cost to himself, since it would mean Miles won't be there to shut off the collider, so Peter will have to stay behind and do it instead, meaning he'll have no way of getting home and will eventually die from being in the wrong universe-itis. I mean, as for Gwen, I don't know what you want Peter to do. Like, Gwen has to come along because she's one of the displaced spider people, and she needs to be there when they activate the collider so she can go home. It's almost like in the first movie, Peter was trying to be a responsible adult or something. Additionally, the way Peter acts in this film generally is just kinda weird. And I don't really know if I can adequately explain what I mean, but I'm gonna give it my best shot. I can definitely see what they're trying to do here, and as an idea, I actually quite like it. It's a nice juxtaposition going from shabby, depressed Peter in the first one to a much more laid-back man who's found genuine happiness. I wanted that for him, and I'm glad he got it. But unfortunately, the writers seem to have taken this idea and stretched it as much as they possibly can, to the point where he doesn't really seem to take anything seriously. Like literally nothing. And honestly, I think this is a much larger issue that no one seems to be talking about, one which him endangering his daughter seems to be more of a symptom of rather than the actual issue itself. In this movie, you get the distinct impression that Peter B. Parker does not give a single fuck. Like seriously, our very first scene with Peter has him swinging around, cracking jokes, and just being a goofball, while Miguel is trying to hold a serious conversation with Miles and Gwen. And I understand that he's trying to lighten the mood, but there's a big difference between that and what he's doing, especially given the context of what's at stake and what revelation Miles is about to receive, which Peter fully knows about. It just makes him kind of a jackass when you think about it. He's trying to show off baby pictures and getting all annoyed when Miguel mentions how the multiverse is unraveling.
The fate of the multiverse.
You always lose me with that. You say, the fate of the multiverse, and my brain dies.
Which is just such an odd exchange. I thought so when I first watched the movie, but it took me a while to really place why. It's pretty obvious to me that the scene they seem to be trying to emulate from the first movie is this one here.
Or everyone's gonna die. That is what they always say. But there's always a little bit of time before everybody dies, and that's when I do my best work.
But while that moment is pretty funny and mostly played for laughs, the context surrounding this is what makes the exchange work so well. It isn't that Peter doesn't care about saving people, it's that he's at a point in his life where he's tired of shouldering all that responsibility by himself, of always being the one people look to sacrifice everything while everything around him falls apart.
With great power comes
Don't
great...
you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it.
He's not apathetic, he's just tired. One of the things I really love about the way he's handled in the first film is that almost every line of his has a double meaning, both in actual dialogue but also the tone in which it's delivered. The scene with him being hyperbolic about bread and his failure to deliver a fresh batch to MJ's table is really funny, but of course it's also clearly representative of what Peter most regrets in the world, something which he currently doesn't think he'll ever get a chance to put right because, again, at this point he believes he's gonna have to sacrifice himself and stay behind in 1610 so that the rest of the Spider team can get home. It's funny, but it's also sad, and that's Peter's entire character in Into the Spider-Verse. That scene of him coming off like he doesn't care about people dying does not mean that he actually doesn't. In classic Peter Parker fashion, he's hiding his true feelings behind a quip or a joke, or a sarcastic lamentation of what is often an over-exaggerated declaration of the stakes. But when Miguel says this line, it comes across like Peter actually doesn't really care and isn't all that interested in what he's talking about, which of course on its own is already weird enough and completely out of character. But then you remember that what caused Miguel to become as radicalized as he is in this film is something Peter was there for. I actually somehow missed this on my first viewing and had to have it pointed out to me, but in the sequence where Miles has shown the footage of a universe collapsing after Miguel tried to slip into it and replace his variant, Peter was there for that. He bore witness to all those people dying while he could only stand there and watch helplessly. So I really don't like this idea that Peter isn't taking any of this seriously. And by the way, I don't think the excuse that he's trying to lighten the mood really works anyway, since he does the same thing later when the spider chase has already begun, shoving his phone in Miguel's face and trying to get him to take a picture of him in Mayday. Peter, the time for that has obviously passed. Are you actually fucking stupid? Also, hang on, does anyone else find it really weird and kind of insensitive that he keeps flaunting all this in front of Miguel? You know, the guy who is the way that he is because he tried to have a family once and lost everything. Again, something Peter fully knows. Like, seriously, dude, I'm happy for you that you rekindled things with your wife and you started that family, but read the fucking room, maybe? I mean, you'd think given where Peter was when we first met him, he'd have the particularly unique ability to understand some of what Miguel's going through and realize this is probably the last thing he wants constantly thrown in his face. Bringing your daughter to work with you and letting her crawl around on him while he's literally explaining to Miles that he lost his family is, tone deaf, to put it mildly. Though I suppose maybe it isn't that Peter doesn't care and really is just that he's stupid. The film seems to think so at any rate.
You want to back me up?
Well, okay, Miguel, as a father of a daughter and the son of a mother...
Yeah, actually, stop talking.
Okay, duly noted.
Oh, I absolutely fucking hate this line. I'm actually getting to a point where I genuinely wonder if the people who wrote this movie are the same ones who wrote the first, because they do not seem to understand this character at all. Peter Parker is not a fucking pushover, as he's depicted several times in this movie, and he's not about about to stand back and watch someone else treat the people he loves the way Miguel treats Gwen and Miles. I understand that he's in agreement with Miguel's stance on the canon, even though, to be honest, I'm having trouble figuring out if he still feels that way by the end of the movie, given that he went along with Gwen, but, you know, we'll see what they do with that, I guess. I even understand why Peter might agree with Miguel, given what he's witnessed, but that does not mean he's about to let him get away with the kinds of shit Miguel does here. Miles and Gwen are the two characters who mainly influenced Peter into giving it another shot with MJ and putting his life back together. They reminded him of what it means to be Spider-Man and to take a leap of faith when all hope seems lost and the effort seems futile. These two people mean so much to Peter that even if he believes Miguel is right, he should still be standing up for them right now, because that's just the kind of person that he is. But throughout the whole scene, he just stands back and lets Miguel force Gwen into the machine to send her home, and then gets told to fuck off after still wanting to be Team Miguel. I'm baffled. I'm genuinely baffled by this. And after a year of mulling it over, I can't keep it in anymore. I was supremely disappointed by the handling of Peter. My hope is, of course, that Beyond the Spider-Verse will be really good, and Across will be known as that weaker middle chapter of an otherwise great trilogy. It is still good, but it doesn't hold a candle to the first one, and I'm praying that a lot of the issues present here get resolved in the next installment. My overall score for the film really hasn't changed that much from the initial review, where I gave it an 8 out of 10, and that's mainly because all the stuff I just went over is more or less how I felt about Peter's character coming out of the theater, but there are a lot of flaws I didn't initially notice, and I think my rating would probably drop by a point or two after subsequent viewings, which is especially sad because Into the Spider-Verse is one of the only comic book films I would give a 10 out of 10. It's just that good. Also, the last thing I think is worth mentioning before we close out is the counter I expect to inevitably receive to all of what I just said. Something that a lot of people commented on my initial review. This is just a cartoon. Why do you care if Peter puts his baby in danger or if Jess goes into battle while pregnant? And I'm always baffled when I get comments like this, because that is never a standard that I've upheld when it comes to assessing media, and if you somehow stumbled upon my channel and thought that shit was gonna fly around here, you are sorely mistaken. It does not matter if it's a cartoon, or if it's fictional, or any other bogus, arbitrary standard people like to use to restrict what truly well-written stories are capable of. And that isn't an argument I'm even gonna try to humor, because it's just stupid. I'm only bringing it up to let you all know that if you try to counter with that in the comments, you'll have officially wasted your own time and accomplished nothing other than giving me the engagement. So thanks for that, I guess. But with all that said, thanks for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you who decided to hear me out and made it this far. And if you like what you saw, stick around. There's more where that came from. That's all I've got for you this time, so I will see you all when I finally learn my ABCs. Goodbye!